Today on the Invested Mindset, we're going to talk about how in the world could a country kid from Appalachia end up as an adult with no formal education becoming a multimillionaire and starting multiple seven-figure businesses. My podcast is designed to help aspiring entrepreneurs and new investors break free from financial confusion by sharing real-world investing and business strategies so they can build lasting wealth and freedom for themselves. I'm your host, Tom Berry, and today let's talk about how somebody with no formal education and really no background for business could end up being a business owner of multiple successful businesses. And if you think about what most people value today, they value education, they value degrees, they value credentials, and so forth. But I'm here to tell you, there are many, many, many of my friends that have backgrounds similar to mine. They have backgrounds that do not they just don't lead you to believe that they could be successful entrepreneurs, successful business owners because of their background. So that's what we're going to talk about. I've told you my name is Tom Berry. I'm from Appalachia, really a small town of 850 people in eastern Ohio, one of the most sparsely populated counties in that state, to be exact. And, I grew up, I didn't know it at the time, but looking back, I grew up poor as poor could be. And I'm sure there are a lot of people listening out there that grew up similar to me. And when you grow up in Appalachia or the Ozarks or some rural community in Mississippi or Kansas or wherever, and you're poor, it's kind of crazy, but you don't even know you're poor because everybody is just like you. Everybody is growing up just like you. Everybody is living just like you. So I guess that's one of the beauties of growing up in such a small place is that you could be poor and not even know it. In fact, where I grew up, the wealthiest people I knew were the coal miners because they had the nicest pickup trucks and they lived in brick ranch houses. And literally, that's how I looked at wealth as a kid growing up, and even into my teenage years. We didn't know anybody wealthy. There weren't wealthy people in that area. So how does somebody go from that to now living in the Houston Metroplex and running multiple companies with 50 employees and so forth? And I'm going to share my journey with you because I think there are a lot of people with backgrounds similar to mine that don't even know they could do the amazing things that I promise you can do. So I got to go clear back to childhood because that's really where I think a lot of it starts for most of us. We carry with us our childhoods throughout the bulk of our life. And sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes that's a bad thing. For me, it was good and bad. And I suppose that's the same for all. The good was the work ethic that I was taught. And that was the most valuable thing I got from my childhood. I grew up working from the time I was old enough to use a wrench and a socket set. My dad would have me working on cars and trucks or tractors or anything else that was broke. I grew up changing engines, changing transmissions. I had no training. I had no instruction on doing these things. But by the time I was 15 or 16 years old, I could literally swap out an engine and transmission in a car or truck in the driveway with no real tools to use other than hand tools and a tripod and a come along. And looking back, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, if anybody had their kids doing that today, the safety issues that revolve around that, the jacking up of a car and setting it on concrete blocks so you could crawl under it and work on it. But that's how we were raised, and that's how a lot of us in that area were raised. We didn't know anything was wrong with that. Um, what that gave me, though, was a discipline. It gave me a work ethic. And I'm going somewhere with this message because I think that is probably the most valuable thing in entrepreneurship is the work ethic, because it's not easy. People think I'm going to quit my job and start a business for myself so I can have some free time. Well, brother, let me tell you something. You are going down the wrong path, because that is not the case. Entrepreneurship takes way more time than punching a clock does. You punch a clock, you work 40 hours, 45 hours, whatever it is. And after that, you get to walk away. You get to walk away with no thought of what's going on at work tomorrow until tomorrow. But as an entrepreneur, you don't get to walk away that easy. So I think that work ethic was really a huge key in being able to achieve the things I've achieved today. Now, from a bad standpoint of growing up like that, um, when you grow up in those areas, those small town, rural areas, you grow up hard, and there's no participation trophy. There's no patting you on the back for a job well done. It's, well, yeah, you did that, but you could have done it better, right? And that sticks with you as well. So I guess one of the other lessons that I learned from my childhood was uh, nobody's going to pat me on the back, and I don't care. I don't need that to survive. And fortunately for me, I was born at a time, I'm a Gen Xer. Um, I was born at a time where people didn't need that so much. The two generations after me, they grew up with the internet, they grew up with cell phones in their hand, they grew up with social media. And I think people crave that pat, that that tweet that says, "Oh, you did such a great job," or that Facebook comment that says, "Oh, you did such a great job." And I'm here to tell you, in entrepreneurship, you don't get much of that here. Um, you got to be able to just do a good job and know you did a good job and be okay with that, because your employees aren't going to tell you what a good job you did. Most of your clients, most of your business associates aren't going to tell you did a good job. You got to be okay with knowing you did a good job on your own. And then I think the last thing that I got out of my childhood that really helped me to be successful in business is I didn't get the opportunity to say I can't do it. If there was a bolt stuck on something I was supposed to change out in the driveway, I couldn't go in the house and tell my dad, "Hey, I can't get it." My dad wasn't home. He was a coal miner. He ran a bulldozer for the strip mines. He was working doubles and triples and crazy, crazy hours, which is where I learned my work ethic. He wasn't there to help. He wasn't there to come out and break that bolt that was stuck. And if he came home and I didn't have that job done, there was heck to pay, right? He's going to jump all over me. Well, why didn't you finish it? I couldn't give him the answer of, well, there was a couple of bolts that were stuck and I couldn't get them. I had to figure out how to get them. And being under that kind of pressure as a kid, what it did is it just taught me you can do things that you initially don't think you can do. Now, let me tell you, if you don't think that is a helpful skill in entrepreneurship, you're not thinking it through clearly. That is a phenomenal skill, because I promise you, every single week at least in building a business, you're going to have something that you go, "I can't do this. We're not going to be able to do this." But you can't say that. You got people depending on you. You've got employees depending on you. You got a family depending on you. You can't say, "I can't." I can't isn't an option in entrepreneurship. The question is, how? I didn't, I wasn't able to get it the first time around, but how can I get it? How can I get it? Because I can't isn't an option. And I think those are the three lessons that I learned growing up. Hard work ethic. You can do things that you just don't possibly think you can. Those are necessary in building a business. I see so many people today trying to build a business. They go a couple of years and they struggle, and then they're back to the W-2. And look, there's no shame in that. I did that several times myself. I had a guy reach out to me recently, and he said, "Tom, are you hiring?" I said, "Always. We're always hiring good people. Any entrepreneur that's not is just foolish." And he said, "Well, I know I've been running my own business for 4 or 5 years, but I can't. I just can't do it anymore. My family needs the security of a paycheck." And I could tell he was very embarrassed in saying that. And I said, "Look, there's no shame in that. I've done that 2 or 3 times earlier in my life." And I just saw a smile come across his face. He's like, "Man, it's so refreshing to hear you say that," because I said, "Everybody else is just looking at me like I failed." I said, "No, you didn't fail. Failing is not providing for your family. You're just doing what's right by you." So look, discipline, hard work, and just an attitude that says, "I can't quit. I won't quit." But in the end, you can't let your family starve either. Look, I traded time for money for the first 3 or 4 years out of high school, and I barely graduated high school. I didn't like school at all. I didn't like being there. I felt it was a waste of my time, and I just wanted to go to work. I wanted to go make money. So obviously, I didn't do very well in school. I graduated with a strong 1.8 or so GPA. College was certainly not going to be in the cards, nor did I ever want to go spend more years of my life not making money and just sitting in a classroom. And then look, I'm not putting down college. 3 of our kids out of the 4 all went to college, got their degrees. And one was like me. He's like, "I don't want to do this. I want out of here. I want to go make money. I want to go see something. I want to go do something." And he ended up going to the Marine Corps. Um, there's nothing wrong with it. But at the end of the day, if you're going to send your kids to college, folks, make sure they have some inkling of what they're going to do with what they're getting out of college. Going to college just to go to college, that was a 1990s thing. And today, it's not necessarily going to be the same thing going forward. I think there are going to be a lot less people going after these 4-year degrees and a lot more people going after jobs, going after things that they don't need to spend, or in some cases waste, 4 years of their life and 4 years of earning ability to go get a degree. So out of high school, I go to work and I get a job scrubbing floors at a grocery store with my education, barely a high school degree. That's what I qualified for. And I quickly found out I had a knack for management. So I moved up in that little grocery store from scrubbing floors to being offered the assistant manager position. I turned it down because I heard what they made, and I thought, I can do better than this. So I got a job as a service manager at a car dealership. What qualifications did I have? None. The only reason I got the job is it was a fledgling little car dealership in a nearby town, and nobody wanted it. Nobody wanted the service manager job. There were 2 applicants. The other guy was very qualified. I was not. He got the job and he quit 3 weeks later. So by default, they called me. And I took the job and I excelled at it. I took this service department that had never made an income in the ownership in the time that the current owners owned it. And we made money our first month. And I found out a couple of things very quickly. I had a knack for sales and I had a knack for management. And I just used those skills and moved from company to company, increasing my pay each time, and just using sales and management. And each company that I went to would send me to management training. And I continued to get more and more management training. So when I say I don't have an education, I always say I don't have a formal education. I certainly have a lifetime of education. I think everybody has to be a lifetime learner. And while I didn't go to college or have a degree, the formal type, I certainly have been to countless schools, whether it's for 3 days or 3 weeks, but countless schools learning more and more and more, but more that is directed to what I wanted to do. And I always wanted to be a businessman. I always wanted to own my own company, not because I thought it was easier, but because I thought I had more potential. The sky's the limit, right? With entrepreneurship, the sky's the limit. That's what we always hear. Well, it is, but we've got to be willing to do some things that I think most entrepreneurs and most business people are not willing to do. The first thing is we have to be willing to learn skills that we were not taught in school. In school, I did take general business in high school, and I excelled in that class. That class, I got one of my highest marks. I got a B in that class. I loved that class because it was something that interested me. But in that class, they didn't really teach us how to read a P&L, a profit and loss statement. They didn't teach us to read a balance sheet. They didn't teach us. I heard the term P&L. Don't think I ever heard the term balance sheet in that class. And they certainly didn't teach us personal taxation and how to mitigate taxes, how to account for things, how to make sure that you're getting the best advantages out of the IRS tax code, legally, of course. They don't teach those things in school. But when I got into management, I had to learn to read P&Ls. And what was interesting is most of the companies didn't teach me either. I had to learn it on my own. I remember my last W-2 job. It was a large privately held company. I was manager of a depot of home salespeople, and I had managed there for just a little over a year. I'd set records there in my depot, and moved that depot from 74th out of 74 to number 7 in 12 months. And I remember sitting down and looking at my P&Ls and looking at the growth that I had my first year there, which was 20-some%. It was phenomenal. And I extrapolated that same percentage over the next year to project what my pay would be, because I was on incentive. The better I did at managing and making money for the company, the more they paid me. So I loved that pay system. But I remember getting done doing the math, and I called my division manager and I said, Craig, I got a problem here. I need to, next time you're in the area, swing in, take a look at my math here and see what I'm doing wrong. Help me out. And he says, well, what are you doing? And I told him the project I was doing. And he said, you're projecting the next year? I said, well, I'm projecting the next 2. But I said, the math isn't working on the first one. I said, because if I increase sales and I increase the company's profits another 22% next year, I'm only going to make another $5,000 in my paycheck. Now I know that can't be right. So you got to show me what I'm doing wrong here. And there was a long silence on the phone. I'll never forget. He just said, you're not wrong. The math's right. And I'm like, how is that possible? I'm making the company millions and millions more, and I'm going to make an extra $5,000. Are you kidding me? And he's like, yeah. I said, how do you keep managers? And I'll never forget this. He said, because you're the only manager I have that knows how to read a P&L. And now that you know, you got a choice to make. And I remember I quit in the next 90 days. I had another job somewhere else. Actually, I didn't have another job. I started my own company. I started a company, which ultimately failed, as multiple of my previous companies had. But that has been the journey to get me to here. So I think about the lessons of childhood, the lessons of my sales and management career. And then I think about the failures of businesses that I've started that just didn't make it. And I put all of that together, and that's how I explain my meteoric success, my overnight success, as most of my colleagues call it in real estate and in business. It was not overnight. There were hundreds of failures prior to starting the current companies that I own, the ones that people know now, and they think, man, look how fast he grew that. Look how fast he grew that. Gosh, must be nice, right? Don't you just love when you have some success and people just look at you like, okay, you must have cheated somehow, right? No, it was all those other things that I've experienced prior that got me where I am today. So, self-employed for 28 years straight now, not a W-2 for 28 years. What do I attribute that success to? Not that I'm that brilliant, not that I have any degrees or accreditations. I don't have any of that. I had no experience to do what I'm doing. What I did have was a drive that I could not stop. I wanted financial freedom. I wanted the freedom of time. I wanted the freedom of choice. And entrepreneurship was the only way I knew of to get all of those things. If you think about freedom, you think about, we got the freedom of speech, the freedom to keep and bear arms, the freedom of assembly, and we could go on, freedom of religion, and all these different freedoms. But in our house, in our home, there are some freedoms that we don't talk about. Financial freedom is a big one. And I guess that's probably the one that most people talk about the most, even though it's not talked about enough, in my opinion. And people will define that differently. But my definition of financial freedom is simply being able to make choices without worrying about the price. That's it. I had some people ask me over the years, how did you know you made it, Tom? And first of all, I will tell you I haven't. I still today have a drive like I've not accomplished anything. I still today play scared because of my background and because I've had businesses that have failed in the past. I know what that's like. I know what that feels like. I know that that can happen at any time. So I'm never, probably ever in my life going to have an attitude of I've made it. But I understood what they were asking. They were asking, when did your life start feeling different? When did your life start feeling different? And I can tell you, the very first thing I noticed, where I noticed my life is different now, is when I would order something at a restaurant without looking at the price. Because all my life, I started at the price. And then I looked to the left to see what I could get for that price. And if there were 2 or 3 plates that were similar in price and it was a lower price for an entree, I'd pick from those 2 or 3. All my life until a certain point. I don't know when that happened, but at some point I noticed I'm just ordering what I want and I don't care what the price is. Now, I still don't go to fancy restaurants. My wife and I aren't fancy people. We'll go with friends if we're celebrating somebody's, 40th wedding anniversary or somebody's birthday or something like that. But we're just not we're not fancy people. But when you can make choices without thinking about the price, I think you've achieved the first level of financial freedom. And that's a big deal. That's a really big deal. The next freedom that I think entrepreneurship gives us is freedom of time. And honestly, for me, that one's more important than the financial side. For me, being able to do what I want, when I want, with whom I want, for as long as I want, that's freedom of time. And to me, that's that's worth more than the money, to be quite honest. For the last 12 years, we've averaged 10 to 12 vacations a year. And, that's a variety of different vacation looks. Sometimes it's my wife and I just going someplace for a week to get away. Sometimes it's us taking our whole family, or maybe one of our kids and their kids, or maybe we're going with friends to explore another island or another country. That's time freedom. Yes, there's a little bit of financial freedom in that too, because that all costs money, and I get that. But it's really more the time than anything. Being able to not be tied down to a schedule. I hate schedules. I don't do schedules. I don't have a single meeting in my life that I have to do every Tuesday, or I have to do once a month, or anything. I have nothing that is a recurring thing that I have to plan around. Because if I had to do that, then I don't have freedom of time. Now, there's plenty of things I do, but I do it when I want to do it. And I think that's one of the biggest freedoms that people don't understand, that you can get ultimately with entrepreneurship. Now, not immediately. It takes time to get to there. It takes time to get to there. And it takes a continuing education, continuing to educate yourself. I ask myself every quarter or so, am I the best CEO for my companies? And if at any point I answer that question, no, you're probably not, I will immediately step down as CEO and go out and hire a badass CEO to put in my place to run my companies, because I want my companies to do well, regardless if I'm the best one to run them or not. I want them to do well. I've got people that depend on us. We have 40 or 50 employees. They depend on us. So I've got to do what's right by the company. So that was my message for today. In a future podcast, I want to break down some of the things that I've had to learn over the last however many years to be able to continue to climb the ladder of success in my own company. Because I promise you, our biggest company right now, Investor Loan Source, our lending company, is, when we started it, my former business partner and I started it, it was just a small little company. He worked out of his home. I worked out of my home. We didn't have any employees. Now it's a big company, multi-millions a year, a lot of employees, and a lot of moving parts. And I promise you, the guys that started that company are not qualified to run it today. I, as CEO of that company that we started, would not be qualified to run this company today. But fortunately, I've committed to a lifetime of learning. I've committed to constantly looking for the things that I'm missing, constantly learning the things that I need to know in order to keep up with the growth of my company. And we'll leave it there for today, because I think that's one of the biggest differences in the highly successful entrepreneur versus the mom and pop business owner. And there is a massive difference. We'll talk about that on the next podcast. Thanks for joining us on The Invested Mindset. To continue receiving actionable wealth building strategies, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Turn on the auto download to ensure you never miss an episode. And if today's insights moved you closer to financial freedom, please take a moment to leave us a rating. It helps fellow entrepreneurs and investors discover these valuable strategies. I'm Tom Berry, and I'll see you next time as we continue building the path to lasting wealth and freedom.